Let's jump right in. Today, we're unpacking a really complex, fascinating situation unfolding in Indonesia right now. We'll be drawing directly from the deep dive documentary Pesta Babi Colonialism in Our Time. This explainer is going to look at a massive national strategic project in Papua that is literally reshaping the entire landscape. And the wild thing is, depending entirely on where you stand, this project looks completely different. Is it absolutely crucial for national security, or is it a recipe for ecological devastation? Let's dive in and see what the source material has to say. To really get to the heart of this issue, we have to start with a seemingly simple question. What exactly does a food bowl mean? Well, the documentary reveals that the answer depends entirely on who you ask. If you're a central planner sitting in an office in Jakarta, a food bowl is a highly structured industrial agricultural zone designed to secure the nation's supplies. But if you're a member of an indigenous tribe living out in the Papuan forest, to you, a food bowl is the living, breathing ecosystem all around you. It's a clash of two completely different definitions of survival.
Part 1. Ambisi Lumbung Pangan Nasional, or the National Food Bowl Ambition.
Just to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this initiative, it is staggering. We're talking about a target of 2.5 million hectares of Papuan forest. Breaking those numbers down, the biggest chunk by far is 1.3 million hectares slated just for rice fields. After that, you've got massive areas carved out for sugarcane at 560,000 hectares, palm oil at 400,000, and livestock taking up another 380,000. But if we take a closer look at these specific crops, things get really interesting. Here's the twist. The source material points out that a huge portion of this project isn't actually about putting food on the table at all. It's heavily driven by bioenergy mandates. The state has targets like bioethanol E10, which means mixing 10% plant-based fuel into gasoline, and biodiesel B50, aiming to mix 50% palm oil right into diesel. So those massive sugarcane and palm oil allocations we just talked about, a lot of that is actually tied to fueling the nation's vehicles.
Part 2, Ancaman Pangan Tradisional Papua, which brings us to the very real threats to traditional Papuan food.
When this grand national blueprint actually meets the reality on the ground, it's literally two worlds colliding. The state's project demands straight, perfectly organized industrial lines of rice, sugarcane, and palm oil. But the traditional Papuan ecosystem, it's already this incredibly rich, complex food web made up of sago palms, cassowary, wild pigs, and river fish. You simply can't force that industrial model onto the landscape without clearing out the natural swamps and forests that produce this traditional food. The documentary shares a quote that really hits the nail on the head regarding the indigenous perspective. This forest is a supermarket for the Awyu, also a food bowl or bank. Think about that for a second. For tribes like the Awyu and the Marand, sago and the surrounding swamps aren't just commodities to be harvested. They are sacred, living entities. They act as a built-in pantry that strictly requires an intact ecosystem to function. When you clear the forest, that supermarket is permanently closed.
Part 3. Hilangnya Hutan dan Rawa, the loss of forests and swamps.
The documentary details exactly how the project is physically damaging the environment, and it is brutal. Imagine the arrival of 2,000 heavy excavators just tearing up the natural terrain to lay down straight roads and carve out flat fields. Then comes the industrial farming phase, with drones flying over to blanket the area with chemical fertilizers. The cascading effect of this is immediate. You get widespread river pollution and a rapid collapse of local animal habitats. The very swamps where sago grows and the forests where cassowaries roam are just being flattened and chemically altered. And to put a human face on these ecological impacts, the film shares a really poignant experience from a local mother. She explains, they drop fertilizer, it flows into the river, water is hard to get, we can't drink. Because those drone-sprayed chemicals are flowing directly into the rivers and swamps, her community's drinking and cooking water has become heavily contaminated. The very ecosystem they relied on to survive has suddenly become toxic to them. There's also this tough irony the documentary points out regarding local participation. You'd think a project like this might offer new jobs, right? Well, when local Papuan farmers actually try to participate in this new rice economy, they're left totally behind. They simply don't have the capital required to buy the specific seeds, the chemical fertilizers, and to cover the heavy harvesting costs that this type of industrial model demands. Adaptation just isn't a viable option for them.
Part 4. Keterlibatan perusahaan dan militer, corporate and military involvement.
So, who is actually behind all this construction? The documentary maps out a truly remarkable concentration of corporate power. It notes that a single family group essentially controls 10 different companies that have been granted 500,000 hectares just for sugarcane concessions. On top of that, you have massive conglomerates like the Jonlin Group acting as heavy contractors. They're the ones bringing in those thousands of excavators. This is an incredibly well-resourced, highly concentrated corporate effort. But it's definitely not just corporate entities running the show. The documentary highlights this striking number: 56,000. That is the estimated number of Indonesian military personnel currently deployed in Papua. Now, you might be wondering, why such a heavy military presence for an agricultural project? The source outlines a dual-purpose strategy. The military is heavily deployed to guard these non-combat commercial projects, basically framing food and bioenergy as matters of critical national security. So they operate directly alongside the corporate contractors. However, the documentary neutrally reports that for the local communities, this heavy armed presence is deeply unsettling, and it frequently triggers historical trauma from past military operations in the region.
Part 5, bentuk perlawanan masyarakat adat, forms of indigenous resistance.
Faced with this overwhelming push from corporations and the military, the documentary showcases a profound cultural response from the Awyu, Muyu, Marand, and Ye tribes. One major method of resistance is the use of sasi, or palang adat. Over 1,800 red crosses have been planted across South Papua. Now, these aren't just your standard protest signs. They are sacred cultural blockades. They blend indigenous customs with religious beliefs to place a fierce spiritual ban on any outsiders entering their ancestral lands. Then, there's something truly fascinating detailed in the film: the Awan Ataban, or the traditional pig feast used by the Muyu tribe. At first glance, a feast might just sound like a massive party, right? But this event actually requires 10 full years of preparation. The documentary explains that this feast is actually a deep-rooted, highly sophisticated mechanism for survival and alliance building. The logic behind this strategy is absolutely brilliant. Step 1. The tribe raises pigs, but they let them roam the forest freely for 10 years. Step 2. Because those pigs literally need the forest to survive for a decade, the tribe is inherently forced to fiercely protect their ecosystem from outside destruction. Step 3. When the feast finally happens 10 years later, multiple clans gather, essentially paying each other for a decade of conservation efforts and forging strong defensive alliances against outside threats. It is quite literally an ecological defense system built right into their culture. At the heart of all this resistance is an unyielding human determination. As highlighted in the documentary, the Papuan women, in particular, flatly refuse to sell their land, no matter how much money the corporations offer them. As one local woman stated clearly and powerfully, "For this land, I will fight for my children." They know that trading away their sustainable ecosystem for a temporary financial payout means completely losing their future. So what does this all mean? The government looks at this project and sees 2.5 million hectares of vital development for national security. The indigenous tribes look at it and see the systematic destruction of their living supermarkets, their clean water, and their entire way of life. It leaves us with a really difficult question to ponder. Are we witnessing vital agricultural development, or are we watching the extinction of a culture in our lifetime? Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today.